of a church or an education system or a nonprofit or a government system or a board of directors where somebody was accused of taking advantage of the system and defrauding its constituents. We see this in, COVID-19 relief loans reportedly went to dozens of ineligible businesses. I'm sure everybody remembers when Verizon got called out for throttling the fire department's unlimited data during the California wildfires. We see this in Wells Fargo accused of quietly changing mortgage maturity dates nationwide, or when they had to pay $7.8 million in back wages over hiring discrimination. So we're going to move forward. Our other speaker, Bill, is going to talk about how these kind of situations of fraud or bad actors are able to take place.
Thanks, Alex. Let's take a look at a traditional organizational model. Often you'll find a pyramid structure with a few at the top with ideas, influence, and governance. The flow of information is generally one direction, top down. A few things that happen when you do this, and we've all seen it. One, selective oppression. As in all democracies and republics, the majority rules, which means some people, a portion of the organization, or the customers and their users are forgotten, neglected, or even silenced. And two, corruption. There's little to no oversight when control is centralized. This makes it easier to surround yourself with enablers, preserving a broken system. And three, a lack of any sort of innovation. Without diverse opinions, ideas become stagnant, reused and recycled, and ineffective. And boardrooms consisting of identical looking stakeholders making decisions intended to preserve its monochromatic hierarchy, rather than leading forward with inclusive and communal propositions and innovation. And top-down initiatives and features rarely, if ever, connect with customers versus a bottom-up employee or user-led initiative. Next slide, please. So in traditional models in government, how does the organizational model scale to fit government? Well, here you can see the field of government, the players, the influencers, and the place of power. In the center of the circle, we find the 1%. These are the corporations and major financiers of our institutions and the laws that protect those institutions. They closely control our healthcare, our housing, education, banks, police, even our wars. The power of influence, which is the dotted black line, stems from the inside of this circle, and its boundaries reach only just so far from the center. And the people, with their diverse strengths and needs, are all along the outside, and with our elected officials inside the field of government. I want to point out how easy it is for ideas to die here, how influence in an unbalanced government actually decays the trust in the system. The system's only goal is self-preservation, not change for the benefit of the people. Next slide, please. As illustrated here, these structures of government support the principal-agent dilemma. In this example, the agent makes decisions that impact the people, or principal, or minorities, without representation. The principal has no way of being sure the agent is acting in their best interest. And around this agent are other officials, also influenced by the agent. Ideas from the people are lost in this system, allowing the agent to take risks on behalf of the principal. And often, it's the principal or the people left with the consequences of the agent's actions. Next slide.
So as we talk about this principal-agent dilemma, we want to talk about how this shows up in forms of social injustice. So as you can see, the principal-agent dilemma is called exactly that for a reason, because it's a dilemma and it shows up as forms of social injustice. So when we talk about increased likelihood of human greed and malicious actors, how this shows up is predatory lending and mortgage discrimination. Latino and African Americans paid almost 1/10 of a percentage point more for mortgages between 2008 and 2015. And although that percentage point sounds very small, when you look at it compounded across a 15 or 30-year mortgage, and that it was directly targeted towards people of color, you're talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars that were taken away from a specific demographic for the sole reason that they were non-white. This is how human greed and malicious actors that come from this principal agent dilemma help fuel predatory and discriminatory actions within this principal agent dilemma. We also see it in the forms of centralization of power, which shows up as autocracy or authoritarianism. And this occurs when there's such a centralization of power, voting, and decisions that it is basically an authoritarian way of making decisions on a larger group of people where they have almost close to no authority or ruling over their own governing bodies and people. We see this dilemma cause no transparent or agreed upon set of rules. Because again, we have this hierarchy where rules are being made at the top and then have to be absorbed or followed by the people at the bottom. Well, this shows up as the New York stop and frisk or the school to prison pipeline, where African American and Hispanic students are suspended or expelled at a rate almost 3.5 times greater than Caucasian students. We see this in conflicts of interest. The police-prosecutor relationship. The American injustice system has the inherent conflict of interest in police-prosecutor relationships. This creates an immunity and almost a mentality of we can get away with murder. Well, that conflict of interest is because there's a hierarchy that allows for it, where we create this relationship of police being responsible for policing police. And then finally, asymmetric information between parties. This shows up normally when the agent has more information that puts them at an advantage over the principal. We see this show up in the wage gap. It's no secret that women are historically paid less than men. But one of the larger discoveries that people are talking about is that women don't actually know to ask for the higher salary. They're not aware that they can negotiate for it. It's why a lot of really large corporate businesses are considering a complete transparency wage model, because that way when someone's coming in, there is no argument or negotiation on behalf of what I should be made based off of my race or my gender. It's simply, this is how many years of experience you have. The person of the same role and same qualifications is being paid X, so you are also going to be paid X. So at the core, the problem lies in the business of it all. The fact that a particular social injustice is profitable to those with power. Thus, to solve X, we should focus on making X a financially unappealing venture. But what we at Indigo Theory advocate for is completely replacing and dismantling X and starting in a new revolutionary approach. And that brings us to section 4, the solution. Why are we here? Well, yes, we're talking about decentralized autonomous organizations, but at their core, these DAOs are supported by blockchain technology. And that's the interesting thing about blockchain technology, is that it is a whole new technology. It's a sequence of blocks that are chained together and distributed among the users. It works as an immutable record that does not require an external authority to validate the authenticity and integrity of the data. Transactions are typically economic, but we can store any kind of information in the blocks. One of the most simple ways to kind of break this down is if you think of yourself as a consumer and you were buying a $500 good off of a vendor. You purchased the good, you saw the $500 leave your bank account, and you saw that your bank confirmed that this vendor's bank account did in fact receive the $500. Well, now that vendor is lying and they're being a malicious actor and they're trying to steal this $500 from you without sending you any good. They said, well, this is a he said, she said situation because you claimed that you sent me $500, but I don't have any record of it on my end. Well, then it starts to get tricky, right? In a normal situation, you would have to go call your bank. You would have them have to fight with whoever that vendor was. You may or may not get your money back. We really only have two sources of truth of what happened during that transaction, yours and theirs. But in blockchain technology, that ledger or that transactional record of the $500 being, removed from your bank account and then sent to their bank account. Well, each one of those transactions is a block on the chain. And not only do I have it and they have it, but hundreds of other people who have access to this public ledger are also aware of the fact that $500 was pulled out of your bank account and deposited into theirs. So now we can't argue of whether or not this person was lying or not, because there's a public ledger of 100 people that agree that said, yes, that money was removed from your account. And yes, we saw that it was deposited in theirs. So now we have a immutability that cannot be tampered with and cannot be argued with, making blockchain technology not only revolutionary, but very, very, very secure. Here you see just a small subset of all of the really, really cool companies from large to small working and building and using blockchain technology. This is a subset of a few, but we see big players in the space too, like Microsoft and IBM and Salesforce. There's so many different companies that we want people to be aware of. And this is, again, just a small subset of decentralized institutions and companies that we see on the Ethereum blockchain. They are providing a new way to iterate on old systems and paradigms. We can see various pieces of industries represented here by various companies and developers that are working every day to bring these solutions to the masses. We have prediction markets for those that like to speculate. We've got derivatives, lending, and financial services that are competing with big banks and stock exchanges and hedge firms. Services such as identity management and gaming. And for the social aspect, and what we come here to talk about today is DAOs, that Decentralized Autonomous Organizations. And you can see here in the upper left-hand corner, just a small subset of the DAOs that are already existing to help make this possible.
Decentralized and autonomous. What does this mean? And why is it important? DAOs provide an operating system for open collaboration. In principle, decentralization is the equal distribution around many participants, making it transparent, immune to alteration or deletion, and trusted. And organizations can run autonomously without the need for coordination by a central entity. Computer code and smart contracts can execute commands without human intervention. Next slide, please. So comparing the structures, the first obvious difference is the distribution of influence. Power is centralized in traditional organizations. They control the pillars of government, and a DAO is governed by the members, with proposals stemming from the people. The second difference is how proposals are introduced. A DAO allows any member to put forth a proposal to vote, where traditional models are limited to the whims of the hierarchical structure. The circle of influence is also larger, with equality given to the members and voting in a DAO. Each proposal is transparent and voted on by all members. The primary source of influence in traditional models stem from the center and are limited by those controlling the infrastructure. Next slide.
So Bill has just explained to you all how a DAO can function from a very high level. And when we look at DAOs, we really focused in on kind of 6 core tenets that go into this paradigm. Decentralization, consensus, automation, transparency, incentivization, and good faith actors. So let's dive into each of these in detail a little bit to show how they're beneficial to the system. Next slide, please. We've said the word decentralization a few times here in this presentation. And for those of you that aren't familiar with it, essentially what it means is that there's no centralized authority. Everyone's used to using sites and services like Facebook or Google or things like that. Well, they own those servers, and those servers live in their data centers. So if those servers were ever subpoenaed, or if they didn't want the information to be on there for censorship purposes or whatever reason, they're the central authority that chooses what to do with that information. With decentralization, all members control the information, and it doesn't live in one place necessarily. It can live in many different servers, computers, basically any infrastructure throughout the world. And the great thing about this is there's really no political or geographical borders to stop someone from either running or participating in these types of systems. There's a quote from the original History of the United States, E pluribus unum, which stood for the 13 colonies coming together. What it actually stands for is out of many, one. But when we're talking about DAOs, I think the better way to look at it and kind of word it is that out of one, many. So what we're doing is, instead of taking a whole bunch of different ideas and collaborating them into one system that could be taken over, we're taking an idea and we're spreading it out and dispersing it across the world so that anybody that wants to participate and use it can. And you can see the little infographic here with the circle. That's what we want to see. We want to see people sharing information with everybody in the system, as opposed to it going through one central figurehead. Next slide, please. An important part of a DAO is consensus. And when we're talking about consensus, we're talking about voting. I think everybody remembers, being young and hanging out with the group of 2 or 3 friends, and these 2 people want to play one game, but the third person wants to play something different. Well, if you were to sit down and take a vote, that would be 2 to 1. And the game that had the higher amount of votes would be the one that you guys were playing to satisfy the majority of the group. So consensus is exactly that. It's a decision in which group members find a common ground through voting and through proposals. So in a DAO, as Bill said, you can create proposals, what are essentially things to vote on, right? And if enough of the group votes in favor of that proposal, then the proposal passes. And we can see up here, there's generally a threshold. It's usually set to 50%, so that majority rules. But the interesting things about DAOs is these votes or proposals could be for essentially anything. What to do with certain funds that the DAO is holding and how to disperse them, how to deal with onboarding or offboarding members into the DAO or the organization. And then even changes to the DAO itself, which gets pretty meta, can be voted on as a proposal. Next slide, please. Automation is a great thing that we've seen with a lot of sites and services, and over time we've been adopting it a lot more. And we're seeing that in blockchain technology. That's no exception to the rule. It's actually a great candidate for automation. We're already dealing with systems and code and technology, so it's very easy to start wiring things together and making things talk to each other for efficiency, optimization, and quality of life improvements. With these types of automations that we've listed on this slide here, we're building sites and services that are going to be available to the end user, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. If you woke up at 3 a.m. and decided, I want to take part in this DAO, or I want to vote on this proposal, or I don't like the way this is going, I'm going to create my own proposal, and you're one of those people that's up at 3 a.m. thinking about that stuff, you can do that. That system is going to be available. You don't need to wait until 8 a.m. the next day for that business to open. It's always available and always on demand. There's really no set working hours. There's no bank holidays. And there's very little criteria or barrier to entry in order to use the system itself and become a member. With the different types of processes and events and triggers and things that we've referenced here on this slide, we start to make some interesting things happen. So when we're doing things like payment processing, I don't need to wait for somebody to wake up and finalize my payment. I can send it, and a trigger or a script can detect that that payment was sent and then start to take action on it automatically. Make this action happen when this fund is received, or make this action happen if this proposal passes through the DAO. And an interesting thing with automation is that the automation can be incorporated into the system itself. And when I say that, that was the meta piece I was talking about earlier. So as a DAO member, you could say, I don't like the 50% threshold to pass a proposal. I want to put in a proposal that says we should have 75%, right? Because I want to ensure more of the majority is on board with my change. If your proposal to change the threshold from 50 to 75% passes, that threshold change happens automatically in the system. And now all future proposals have to meet that 75% threshold. So it's really awesome when you take some of the other things that we've talked about and couple it with automation to make a lot of these changes and things and actions happen on the fly automatically. Next slide, please. Transparency is one of the great benefits of blockchain technology. So when we're talking about blockchain tech, we said you want to kind of think about it as like a database, essentially. But that database is decentralized. It's not on a single server anywhere. And the real big benefit is everything that happens on a chain is generally viewable by a ledger. So you can go and look up any part of it at any time. DAOs work on a chain, and they generally have, and not in all cases, but in most cases, they have a digital token tied to it. And you may have heard of digital tokens like Bitcoin or Ethereum, but for the purpose of a DAO, that token can really be anything. So if I want to run my own DAO and have a coin called ROMcoin and distribute it to my members, I can do that very easily. That token is going to be used for various functions like creating the proposals to be voted on or voting on the proposal itself. And it can also be used for adding and removing members. Now, in some DAOs, that token may have a real world value tied to it, or it may not, but the two are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Since we're using tokens and we're using the ledger, and this is a fully transparent system, what this allows us to do is allows us to start to take a look at all the actions and people in the system and see what they're doing, right? What are they voting on with these tokens? How are they voting with these tokens? Do they always vote no on every single proposal because maybe they're a bad actor, or they don't necessarily understand these proposals and what they're trying to achieve? And what we've listed here is a vote from a live DAO currently. And what this DAO does is this DAO ships medical supplies more efficiently across the country. It kind of goes outside of the processes of government and says, we can do this better based off of the people that are members in the system and the information we're consuming. So this vote here on the slide, vote number 4, was actually to move 250,000 N95 masks to a hospital in Birmingham, Alabama. So Birmingham had a need, somebody recognized that. They created a proposal in the DAO. The members went and consumed that proposal or viewed the information and then decided, do I want to vote yes or do I want to vote no? And we can see here that this proposal passed 100%. We can see the amount of tokens, the DMR2 token down at the bottom there that was used by the members of the DAO. And this is essentially what it looks like. And the great thing about this transparency is while the system is fully transparent, we're not tying any of the user information or your personal information or anything to anything on here. If you were to look at kind of the back end of a DAO and what this process looks like, you would see a lot of strings and numbers talking to each other and doing things, but you would never see my name, Ron Stoner, go across that system. And that's one of the benefits for the people that want to participate in this, but want to be privacy conscious or not necessarily make themselves a target, because we are talking about and dealing with things like social injustices. So it's a great way to be effective in a transparent manner. Next slide, please. One of the big things that comes up when we talk about DAOs is the what's in it for me. So these are great tools that can kind of help solve some of these problems with social injustices. But at the end of the day, we don't want to put our time into a system, or we're not going to continue to work within a system unless we're getting something back. And the stuff that we've talked about today is great because we know that we're doing things more efficiently, we're doing it in a more optimized fashion, but there can also be some personal incentivization to maintain good faith actors in the system and to keep people interested and to keep people as actors in that system. And this could be things like rewarding individual behavior. So if you are a participant in the system that is seen as always voting on good proposals, or you're contributing back from an education standpoint or things like that, a DAO could create a proposal to grant tokens or release an amount of tokens to a specific member in the DAO to reward them. We see this with development teams and groups and people that are building some of these tools and solutions. So there could be rewards or proposals there to kick back some funds to these developers to enable them to continue to build these things. And then this also happens with community and charity. But the real thing that really kind of drives this is token value. So while I'm participating in the DAO and giving back to the system, I'm getting kickbacks myself. And we've even seen in some cases where developers and participants have been given enough tokens to be able to focus on this stuff full time, right? They don't need to have a 9-to-5 job. They have tokens in the DAO and they're granted tokens, which gives them more rights and more voting power, but it also enables them to take some of these tokens of value and provide for themselves so that they can actually work on these things that are important. Next slide, please. The big criticism with DAOs and the voting component that comes up sometimes that we hear is the concept of malicious actors. We know as humans that there's going to be bad faith actors. There's going to be corporations that want to gamify things. There's going to be people that are trying to put out misinformation and point out flaws inherent in the system. And while we know that it's not necessarily perfect, we do feel it is better and more optimized and provides more of those functions for people than a regular old world kind of analog system. So in order to deal with the malicious actors, we have a couple avenues that we can take as DAO members in order to deal with that effectively. One of those options would be actually voting out the member. So just because you are a DAO member does not mean you are a member for life. If you're one of those persons that's causing too many problems, or you're not participating and voting on proposals for whatever reason, there can be consensus to vote that member out of the DAO and bring in somebody else that wants to participate and provide more value. You have to be careful with that because, as I said, there's going to be people that try to gamify that. But as long as you're maintaining and incenting good faith actors within the system and following the rules of the proposal and making sure those voting thresholds are high enough, it helps to remove a lot of that and mitigate that risk. We could also freeze the tokens of those users, so we don't necessarily have to vote them out. There's things where you could put temporary locks on tokens until further information is found for whatever situation you're dealing with. We can also look at a user's voting history to see, do they consistently vote no on every proposal for no good reason? And if they do, that's a problem. We need to figure that out. We're gonna be able to see that through the voting history, through the transparency. And then there's other controls from a technical standpoint that stops things like double voting or voting yes twice on a proposal, things like that. So the system is kind of built to help mitigate a lot of those risks and operate in the best way possible. Next slide.
Okay, so code is law. Well, DAOs use a thing called smart contracts, which is code. And the way that smart contracts work is they are a set of code that functions like a contract, what it sounds like. It's a series of rules or regulations or variables or criteria that's met. And when those conditions are met, this code is enacted. And so the reason why this is important is because the parameters of the system cannot change due to immutability and require governance and consensus agreement by the participants within the system. So when we say that code is law, it's because this code was agreed upon by everybody. There was consensus by everybody. That's not to say that it can't be changed. Code can often be audited if there's loopholes or there's things that there's not consensus on or people don't agree upon. That code can obviously be written as it should be. But the whole point is that these rules are enacted and automated because they were already pre-agreed on. And the reason why this is important is because there's less opportunity for economic, racial, and gender bias to determine a decision, because the smart contract is determining the decision because it's already been pre-orchestrated beforehand. You are seen as just a number and an input. So there's no room to say, oh, your ballot wasn't counted, or introduce ambiguity into the process. Code does not get tired. It does not complain. It does not have a bad day. It doesn't have any predisposed thoughts because it's code. And a really good sort of real life example to think of this, outside of the tech space, is the way that shopping carts have those like sensors on the wheels, that if you get the shopping cart too far away from the center location of the store, it enacts a lock, and it locks the wheels to prevent you from stealing the shopping cart from the grocery store parking lot. Well, smart contracts worked in the same way. When a certain meta conditions are met or something occurs, that contract is enacted, and then the following things take place. So instead of having a human being having to constantly regulate or constantly change their decision or their process and kind of go with the motions like you see in hierarchical organizations, what we're relying on here is code that everybody has agreed to that is going to replace those very human-based decisions and innately biased decision processes. So what this does is DAOs give power back to the people. And DAOs are able to do this because all people feel incentivized to take part. We no longer have this principal agent dilemma or this hierarchical issue where people at the top are more powered or more incentivized to make decisions on behalf of all the people at the bottom. Now what we're doing is we're automating tasks that no longer need to be handled day to day by a human and giving power back to the people to actually make their voices and their opinions and their choices heard. We see this in a lot of different examples. I know I showed you in a previous slide all the different businesses and companies, big and small, that are using blockchain technology. But here are 4 key ones that are actually using decentralized autonomous organizations. The first one being Aragon, which is basically a code database that can help you build your own DAO. So if this is something that you're interested in considering or looking into for your business, there's an entire developer stack of information and code that you can use to leverage and build your own decentralized autonomous organization. Colony is also a really fantastic one. It specifically targets organizations and nonprofits. It's got a platform that's already built for you to use, so you can go on. The onboarding process is pretty easy. You can create tasks, you can get your organization onboarded, you can get people onboarded, and it colonizes your group to work in a DAO. The third is DXDAO, which they help fund developers to help build DAO technologies. So if you're a developer in the audience and this is something that you're curious about and you want to explore, there are funds available to help you pursue that. And last but certainly not least is PyDAO, which creates economic empowerment for common people, or for people that might actually have barriers to access or entry with some other economic opportunities. And it basically allows this through investment funds. And like we said, this is really supposed to be a talk about how we as a community can be exposed to the revolutionary principles of decentralized autonomous organizations and blockchain technology. And that's not just for tech people. That's not just for people who are in IT or who are developers. The first link that you have here is 12 different areas that you can go to for completely free learning resources. They range from IBM's free courses to Udemy. The second link is the Colorado blockchain community. This is a community of partners and businesses and government and policymakers that all exist in the state of Colorado. We're actually one of the largest blockchain hubs in the nation. And so this is a really amazing resource for anybody. You do not have to be a developer or necessarily in the blockchain space to network and meet with like-minded people that find this technology to be very interesting and revolutionary. Third is Denver Blockchain Week, which is very similar to Denver Startup Week, but specifically for the blockchain community. Unfortunately, they will not be having it this year because of the pandemic, but in years past, it's been a great community and resource for workshops for beginners, networking. If you are interested in getting a job at a blockchain startup or business, it's a really amazing resource for that. Cryptorado community is still very active through the pandemic. They have meetups and virtual meetups and happy hours. They have resources for free education if you want to explore. And then last, again, but certainly not least, is ETH Denver. This is the Ethereum Denver Hackathon that is hosted every year in Denver. It takes place at the Sports Castle on South Broadway. This year for 2021, it will be virtual, but it's an amazing conference for hackers and community members alike. It's actually where I met our entire team at Indigo Theory, and it is a great place to get exposed to blockchain.
So why are we here? Cryptocurrency and blockchain sectors are almost exclusively male-dominated, and in this country with little representation by minority groups. We're still in the early stages of adoption until we begin building inclusive products that address these social issues before blockchain actually gains mass adoption. Indigo Theory is an ethical hacker collective with principles rooted in empathy. We believe in changing the principal agent dilemma by breaking down barriers and giving access to information and opportunity for everyone. This is so all people may take part in blockchain's revolutionary capabilities to help build a future free of systemic and systematic injustice, and one built on equality and trust. At Indigo Theory, we're working on blockchain projects based on empathy. We're tackling identity, mental health in schools, the pandemic, supply chain, and the homeless. And we're motivated to tackle large social problems. So I'd like to take this time to give a quick demo of our latest project, DPR, which is a DAO that we worked on to address medical supplies during the pandemic. Thanks for watching. Visit our website to learn more about these projects near and dear to us. And I'd like to take this time to thank everyone who joined us today. I understand that your presenters are light on diversity, and we acknowledge that. We're learning, we're listening, and we want to help. We're not experts in diversity, but we are experts in blockchain and DAOs. If you have any questions or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. This presentation will be available for download on our website, indigotheory.io. And all references pertaining to the presentation will also be available. And at this time, we'd like to open it up to any questions and discussions.
So we don't see any current questions in the chat. If you guys have them, please let us know. We want to know your thoughts. As Bill said, we are not experts in this space, right? We're experts on the tech side. So we want to know how we can better help everyone and help solve some of these problems. We're also interested in your guys' experiences. Just this week, and I posted this in the chat, Cameron Winklevoss tweeted that at a blockchain summit, there was an attendee that was having trouble getting yellow taxi cabs. But when he uses Uber, there's never a problem there. So where's the disconnect, right? And I think that's some of the stuff that we've identified and talked a little bit about today. And he also followed up with a quote that said, you know, technology won't end racism and, to our point, some of this social injustice, but it can remove bias from some of the interactions. And I think any bias that we can remove using some of these tools is just going to be beneficial to the community as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we don't have any more questions.
I will say that looking forward with some of this technology, one of the another criticism besides the malicious actor piece that we talked to, and we've seen this with some of the DAOs that we've run, is that when you do use tokens with a value attributed to it, sometimes when the network is congested, the costs of doing those votes and those proposals can be high. And what's really interesting is there's kind of two mindsets that are adopting right now. And the first one is the entire scaling debate on the technical side. So some of these new technologies like Ethereum 2 and different chains and protocols are looking at reducing the amount of overhead to take part in these systems and the cost to take part in these systems. And that's great because it's going to open up a lot more availability to people that want to use this stuff and take advantage of it. The other mindset that people are kind of focusing on is looking at things like, how can we do voting off chain? So we may not need to do every action on a blockchain. We may be able to take certain benefits and pieces from the DAO and continue to do it the way we are today, but maybe we can modularize some of these other things and do it in a way off chain that it still feeds into the blockchain technology piece. So I'm extremely interested to see kind of over the next 6 months or a year how all this plays out. But even just in the past week or two, we've seen a couple different talks talking about similar content to us, presentations where people are trying to tackle these issues and noticing and going, wait a minute, this is a problem. How can we help solve it?
All right, well, thank you guys so much for joining our talk. We really appreciate it. As was mentioned in the presentation, you can always reach out to us. This whole presentation is available for download at indigotheory.io, and you can also see information about all the other projects that we've worked on and competed with. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you coming.
Oh, we do have one question real quick. I'm in back-end development, but I'd like to learn how to ethically hack. What are some resources to learn how to hack? This is a question that I love. I'm a security engineer, I'm a hacker. I think the best thing you can do is start to look at some of the industry certifications like Security Plus and some of the other ones that'll give you the intro knowledge into ethical hacking and the tools. We're hackers, and that doesn't mean that we're penetrating systems and defacing web pages. What it means is we're building, right? We're going outside of the system. We're thinking outside of the box. We're using things like programming languages and blockchain technology and all these different pieces together in new and various and creative ways. And when you look at the traditional kind of definition of the word hacker, everyone thinks it's defacing web pages, but really, are you a builder? Can you think outside of the box? And to me, like, start looking at Security Plus, the industry certifications, because ethical hacking can kind of span an entire breadth of knowledge and subject material. And I think just kind of starting there and looking at how can I use my skills in a good way? There's things like hacktivism. There's hackathons where companies and services like Gitcoin and DevPost are sponsoring hackathons to do stuff like, let's solve COVID-19 or let's solve the medical supply issue. So I think if you can find your niche and figure out where you can contribute into that portion of the ecosystem, there's definitely a ton of opportunities. And then the other great thing is find like-minded people, start talking to your community and your network. That's how I met Bill and Alex here. And since then, we've just been working on these products rooted in empathy because we all have like-minded mindsets with that stuff. So I think start there, and that's the best way to approach it.
I'd say too, a lot of the resources that Ron talked about are in that presentation, that tools and resources. I'm not a developer, and I've competed in 6 hackathons this year, and we've placed in every one. And so you don't really need to have that deep-rooted technology or deep-rooted knowledge in the blockchain technology space. You just have to want to be a part of it and care. And if you're not at the level where you feel comfortable actually being involved in a hackathon and competing, you can show up as a participant and as an attendee. ETH Denver is open to everybody to come. You just have to sign up. There's a lot of virtual hackathons where they have the final presentation and readout where you can see everybody that competed and the type of projects that they did, and they'll share out contact information. So we've had people who we've never even met before saw us present on a winning, hackathon, like this was our winning idea, this is what we built. And I've had people reach out to us through the website, like, how do I get involved? How can we help? And some of them are social workers. Some of them are people just that are community members. And they're like, I love what you're doing. So, to Ron's point, it's really about just the want and the desire. And then there's a community there to help support you through it and get you involved.
Yeah, hackers also doesn't necessarily have to just be code. Hacking ideas, hacking the system. Most of the ideas that were coming up do not work in today's infrastructure. So we're really redefining it, starting from scratch, tearing it down, and try to build it up that is more inclusive. So we're hacking the system, and pretty proud of that.
We've got another question too. Do you see this taking off more in developing countries where governments are already somewhat unstable and more opportunities exist for alternative governance systems?
I would say that it's happening here. We have been in touch. I mean, it's already happening here in Colorado. We have the My Colorado ID. They're actively working on solutions, initially working on identity. There is also a team out of Austin that is doing good work in a very similar space, addressing homeless and documentation. So I would say there are a lot of support. Wyoming is another crypto-friendly community where they see the importance of land titles being valuable. So they're investing their time in there. Is this going to happen in something like Venezuela? I know that people have been trying to do such. So I fully expect countries on their way out may actually embrace blockchain to salvage what little they have left.
I think countries, I was going to say, I think countries on their way in are going to be looking at it too. So people that, are looking for a new alternative that may not necessarily have hardships or struggle going on currently. Like, I'm very excited because I know some people have been talking about the concept and they're looking at things like, can we have a sovereign city that operates on these types of technologies? And there's some very cool and interesting projects when you start to read about that, where there's going to be communities that are very pro-focused, pro-crypto, and I'm sure DAOs are going to be a part of that. I'm super excited to see like a micro sovereign nation like Sealand or somebody try to run with this and make it really work on a small scale and then adopt it. Yeah.
I think too, when you look at Ethereum, we all met at Ethereum Denver, but that is one blockchain hackathon conference that Ethereum hosts. So there's Ethereum Berlin, there's Ethereum London, there's Ethereum San Francisco, there's Ethereum New York City, there was Ethereum Singapore. We see a huge uptake in Germany. Half of our team, when I said we were actually global, Indigo Theory it's because half of our team is in India, and we have crazy polar opposite schedules, but we still compete in hackathons together. And there's a huge activity happening there, and a lot of them will come to the United States and compete in United States hackathons, but they're coming from all over the world. So it's very true that this is the next big thing. It's going to be slow to adopt because it is so revolutionary, but I believe in anywhere from like the next 10 years, it almost replacing most mainstream infrastructures that you think of when you think of banking and stock markets and even education and voting. Like there's a lot of discussion about its capabilities. And so yes, I very much see this going to be on the rise in countries where infrastructure is failing, and there needs to be a new system to replace it.
Great questions.
We got another one. Let's see here. Oh, thank you. And then somebody pointed out your shirt, Bill. That you were, I think, is that you were wearing a button down or a polo. Okay. No more open questions. If there are no more, I think we can, it's up to you guys, wrap it up. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. And like I said, feel free to email us to answer any questions. And yeah, welcome to the blockchain space.
Yeah, please reach out to us. We want to keep the discussion going. Let's keep talking about how we can make this better and how we can make it inclusive as possible. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.